so often, evidence shows up that makes you stop and wonder if the world is far stranger than we realize. And in this episode, I've got several of them. We'll start with video footage that appears to show a portal opening. From there, it only gets stranger. A bizarre encounter deep in the wilderness. Something caught in the sky that no one can explain. And finally, an ordinary photo that revealed something the couple never even knew was there. Don't worry, I saved the best for last. I received this footage via email. The footage you see now was taken from one of her 8 security cameras that she installed in her backyard, due to all of the strange things that were happening. First, let's back up a minute and let me read the email from Victoria. Hi Dread, this portal popped up twice in our backyard one night. The house was in Noonan, Georgia. The place was just weird. My son was terrified of the house and would sleep downstairs on the couch until we moved out of there in 2019. My niece said she sees a man with red eyes there. My husband and I fought constantly, and that's not normally a thing that we do. I'm attaching 2 videos and a picture of a pair of his eyeglasses that disappeared one day only to pop up 2 years later in the backyard. Whatever it was intelligent and hid very well because we never saw it. We could hear something but never see anything. I always heard a baby crying in what sounded like a ballroom with a bunch of people talking and glasses clinking. It's crazy, I know. We moved out of there and have never seen or heard anything again. Thank you, Victoria. P.S. Turn down the volume when watching the video footage. Now there seems to be several things going on here. 1. The place appears to be haunted. She mentions her husband's glasses that were taken from inside the house and appear 2 years later in her backyard. Here are the pictures that Victoria sent me of the glasses. She also hears what sounds like a baby crying. And she also hears what sounds like a ballroom of people talking and glasses clinking, like some type of get-together is going on at the house. What exactly happened at this house, where these spirits are hanging around and won't leave? Are they responsible for what we're about to see? I have to say this is a pretty amazing video. I'm going to fast forward to the part right before this portal, or what appears to be a portal, opens up. Then we will take another look at it and analyze it a little further. Now let's look at this slowed down to 25%. You will see there is a small ball of white just prior to this thing opening up. You can tell that there are traces of bugs flying around, but what appears to be this ball does not seem like a bug. The light from this supposed portal gets brighter, as you can see, and there is nothing behind it that you can see from this video. Victoria mentioned that she had 8 cameras at the time, but she wasn't able to back up all the video from the cameras. So this is the only camera that we have video footage from. You can see the shadows from the deck posts from the light. To have this bright of a light source emanating at this angle, you would definitely see the source of the light prior to this happening. I don't see any evidence of that. It doesn't appear that there's a spotlight or anything that is behind it. Do I think this is a portal of some kind? Maybe. It might just be. I can't explain how this light appears. And in this shape. It's like a doorway. Possibly a doorway to another dimension. Now I'm going to let the video play, and you can hear Victoria's family's reaction to what appears to be a portal, or at the very least some type of light energy source.
What is it, Molly?
Look,
there's nothing there.
I'm going to walk up there. I'm going to walk right towards that.
There's nothing there.
Look, hey, don't leave it. Stay right here, Victoria. You stay here in the corner. You keep it. Is it on? Keep it on the camera. She's going to stand right in the corner. I'm going to walk up towards it.
There's nothing there.
I know, but I want you to see if you see me coming into that. I'm scared, man.
That's where the fucking kids jump on the trampoline.
No, I did. I got a real weird feeling all of a sudden. Usually I'm not scared of shit. I just got the chill ran through my body.
Now, if you think that is crazy, then watch this clip of them walking behind this energy source. If there was a spotlight or some type of light source causing this, there would be a shadow when they walk behind it. You can clearly see that the light source is coming from this portal-shaped object and glowing outwards because you can see the shadows of the beams of the deck. If someone would walk behind that light source and there are no shadows, that means what you see is the actual light source. I have to say, this is a very interesting video. I've been wrestling with how to put this into words for weeks now, but I think it's best if I just lay it all out and see if it makes any sense to you. I'm hoping you'll keep an open mind. Something happened to me on October 27th while I was driving home from work on M28 in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and I swear I've never seen anything like it before. I can't get it out of my head, and I keep running through all the possible explanations for what I saw. None of them seem to fit. I'm going to give you every detail I can remember, and maybe you can help me figure out what to do next. I work the closing shift at a small hardware store in Munising. I'm usually there until around 10 p.m., but sometimes it goes later if we're dealing with inventory or if a customer lingers. On that particular day, October 27th, it was already past 10:30 by the time I locked up. My coworker Mark left about 10 minutes before I did, and I stuck around to make sure everything was in order for the next morning. I wasn't in a bad mood or anything, just kind of tired. I remember wishing I'd packed something more substantial for lunch, because I felt a headache coming on from not eating enough. Anyway, I got in my car and started heading west along M28. My plan was to swing by a friend's place in Bergland if I didn't feel too wiped out, but I wasn't entirely sure I'd make it without dozing off. The roads up there get pretty dark at night, and I was debating whether I should just head straight home or make that extra detour. I figured I'd make a final decision once I'd driven a bit. Sometimes a cool breeze from the lake can be refreshing, and the drive can actually wake me up if I'm on autopilot. That night, though, it was colder than usual. I remember flipping on the heat and fiddling with the radio, trying to find something to keep me engaged. I settled on a talk station, some late-night show about local news. They were discussing a recent string of break-ins in the area. It wasn't exactly riveting, but at least it was something to listen to besides the hum of my own thoughts. After about 40 minutes on the road, I noticed something moving in my peripheral vision on the right side of the car. At first, I assumed it was just a deer or maybe a bear. That's not uncommon around there. We all know to watch out for them, especially at night. But then I saw what looked like two distinct shapes moving. They were farther away, near the tree line. I slowed down instinctively because I didn't want to risk hitting anything if it bolted across the road. That was when I realized these things were bigger than deer, and they weren't moving like any bears I'd ever seen. I was only able to see them because my headlights angled that way at a slight curve in the highway. It looked like they were wrestling or fighting. It was violent, enough to make me wonder if maybe it was just two large animals fighting over territory or a mate. Still, something about it didn't feel right. I pulled over, which in hindsight might not have been the smartest idea, but curiosity got the better of me. I eased my car to the shoulder, rolled my window down a crack, and tried to get a clearer view. I couldn't make out all the details at first because they were partially obscured by some brush. I leaned across the passenger seat, squinting, trying to see if I could figure out what kinds of animals they might be. Then, one of them stood up. I don't mean it got on its hind legs for a second like a bear might when it's being aggressive or curious. I mean it straightened up tall and stayed upright. And it wasn't shaped like a bear at all. It was lanky but muscular at the same time, and I could see an outline of a head that looked almost like a large wolf's head, except this was definitely not just a wolf. It moved in a way that was far too fluid, and its arms, which were too long to be typical front legs, swiped downward at something else in front of it. That was when I realized the second shape was huge and built like a massive person, though covered in thick hair from what I could tell. It towered over most people I've met. I'm 6'1", and this thing would have dwarfed me. My heart started hammering because I knew I wasn't looking at any normal wildlife. I struggled with my seatbelt for a second, trying to crane my neck for a better view. I reached for my phone, but I was shaking, and I fumbled with it. By the time I managed to get my phone camera going, I could only capture a dark, grainy scene that didn't show much. The shapes were still there, still fighting, but they moved around so much that all I got was blur. At some point, the hair-covered figure let out a low, rumbling noise, almost like a roar but deeper than anything I've heard from a typical animal. The wolf-like creature responded with a guttural snarl, and I could even see its head snap forward like it was trying to bite. They circled each other, and it looked like each one was trying to find a weakness in the other. It reminded me of those nature documentaries where large predators size each other up. But these two were not normal predators. I got this overwhelming sense that I should not be there. It was fear, but it was also something else, like the feeling you get when you've intruded on something that's way beyond your understanding. I couldn't drive away though. My brain was stuck between you need to run and you need to know what's going on. While I was frozen, I saw the hairy figure, like a giant upright primate, take a broad swing at the wolf-like one. It made contact, and the wolf-like one stumbled back. In that split second, I saw a portion of the brush move aside, and the headlights illuminated part of its torso. It had patches of fur, but there was also exposed skin, and the muscles were defined. It let out another snarl, and then charged forward with its claws extended. They clashed, and the impact was so intense that I could hear it from where I was sitting in my car. I swear the ground might have even trembled, though it could have been my nerves playing tricks on me. After that hit, the hairy figure bent slightly, like it might have been hurt or winded. It recovered pretty fast, though, and the fight continued. The whole thing was chaotic, and I was just trying to keep my eyes focused to understand what was happening. I caught glimpses of arms swinging, jaws snapping, heavy breathing, and the constant rustling and crashing through the undergrowth. It went on like that for what felt like several minutes. I have no clue how much time actually passed. I was in a daze. Suddenly, the larger figure let out a sharp, forceful sound. I don't even know how to describe it. Somewhere between a shout and a roar. The wolf-like creature stumbled back again, and I could see it was limping slightly. Then, almost like it realized this was a fight it couldn't finish, it started to back away. It stayed on two legs while it retreated, but sometimes dropped to all fours to move faster through the brush. Eventually, it vanished into the dark. The taller figure stood there, breathing heavily. I could hear this deep, rhythmic sound, like labored exhaling. It looked around, almost like it was trying to sense if there were any more threats nearby. I was afraid it might notice my car, but my headlights were partially blocked by the angle of the road and the brush. Maybe it didn't see me or didn't care. After what might have been half a minute, it also lumbered off into the darkness. I'm not going to pretend I know what these things were, but one was definitely an enormous hair-covered being with a humanoid form, and the other was a tall, wolf-like creature that walked in a way that clearly wasn't normal for any canine I've ever heard of. Once I realized they were both gone, I finally snapped out of my trance. My hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble gripping the steering wheel. I took a few deep breaths, which didn't help much, but I forced myself to drive away. I kept checking my rearview mirror like I expected something to chase me. I was mentally replaying the entire fight, trying to see if I'd misread what I was looking at. I couldn't come up with any rational explanation. They were definitely not bears, not typical wolves, and not people in costumes. The sheer size and the way they moved was all wrong for any of those possibilities. I ended up driving straight home. I didn't even consider stopping by my friend's place in Berglund anymore. Once I got to my house, I parked in the driveway and just sat there with the engine off, trying to calm down. My headlights were still on, illuminating my garage door, and I remember feeling like I should keep them on, as if darkness was suddenly the enemy. I called my brother. He's the type who gets annoyed if you call after 11 p.m., but I didn't care. I needed someone to ground me. I told him I'd seen something big and scary fighting another big, scary something on the side of the road. He asked if I'd been drinking. I told him no, but I don't think he believed me. He told me to get some rest and that we'd talk more in the morning. The next day, I tried to look at my phone footage, hoping that maybe I'd captured something I could analyze frame by frame. Unfortunately, all I got were a few seconds of dark, shaky video. You can hear some strange noises, but you can't see anything definitive. If I showed it to someone else, they'd probably just shrug and say it could be anything. I considered driving back to the spot during daylight to see if there were tracks or any signs of a struggle. But I'll be honest, I was freaked out. I kept imagining that something might still be in that area, and I didn't want to run into it again on my own. I ended up convincing a friend to come with me 2 days later, but by then it had rained, and we couldn't find any obvious footprints or disturbed ground. We saw some broken branches, but that might not mean anything. Could have been storm damage or something else. I went through a phase where I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear and a really large person, or something bizarre like a person in a gorilla suit being attacked by a strange animal. But as soon as those thoughts crossed my mind, I remembered how fluidly the wolf-like creature moved and how massive the other figure was. No normal person in a costume would appear that tall or that physically imposing, at least not without mechanical assistance. And I don't see how you'd get a bear to cooperate in some staged fight. Plus, the sounds they made were too intense. I've heard bear growls online, and I've been near wolves at a sanctuary once. These noises were on another level, like they came from deeper in the throat or chest, louder and more resonant than anything I've encountered before. I considered telling the story to some coworkers. Then I thought about how that might damage my reputation, or how people might think I was just making it up, or that I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed it. I finally told Mark, the guy I closed with that night, and he just nodded politely. I could tell he didn't believe me. He suggested maybe I'd seen a couple of moose fighting. I've seen moose. They don't stand upright like that, and they definitely don't look like giant hairy people or wolf-like creatures with arms. He laughed it off in a friendly way, so I let it go. I don't blame him for being skeptical. It's an outrageous story. Despite my reservations, I did upload the video to my personal YouTube channel, but it's unlisted because I'm not ready for the barrage of comments I'd probably get if I made it public. The footage, as I mentioned, is basically nothing more than a few seconds of darkness and some weird growls. If I show it to someone, it just sounds like an odd animal recording. A couple of my friends have seen it, and they either think it's just me messing around, or they say it's inconclusive. Nobody but me seems to take it seriously, although one friend said the audio alone freaked him out. Sometimes I wonder if I should just put it behind me, but the whole thing was so intense that it's changed the way I feel when I'm out driving at night. I can almost feel the adrenaline kicking in again, like it did those many years ago, right at the base of my neck. I was stationed at the 56th Fighter Wing at Luke Air Force Base back in the mid-80s, around the fall of 1986. We were used to training exercises in the Arizona desert, plenty of normal sorties, range practice over Barium Goldwater Range, all that. Then, one night, we got an urgent scramble call that flipped my entire understanding of the skies upside down. We'd been on a routine night training schedule, practiced dogfights, some low-level flying, nothing out of the ordinary. I just landed about half an hour prior and was still unstrapping from my F-15 when the klaxon went off for a scramble. Typically, that meant there was an unidentified aircraft failing to follow proper approach protocols or a lost civilian plane. But the tone in the flight chief's voice, the way he was stammering into the radio, had me suspect it was more than that. He never stammered. So I dropped everything and got right back into flight gear. We launched quickly, maybe a 5-minute turnaround from the moment I heard the alarm to wheels up. I remember how the desert night looked absolutely still and black, broken only by the city lights in the distance. They vectored us northeast, towards some no-fly zones near the edges of the Grand Canyon area, which raised my eyebrow because intruders are more common along the southern flight routes. But from what the controllers told me over comms, radar had picked up something traveling at an impossible speed, then stopping on a dime. They specifically said, stopping, which was a detail that didn't even register with me as real. With conventional aircraft, you see a deceleration, or a bank or something. Nobody just goes from full tilt to zero unless they're a smoldering heap on the ground. I still get goosebumps when I recall how we approached the last known or tracked coordinates. My wingman was about a mile to my right, maintaining formation while I kept scanning the horizon. The ground radar was telling us something was supposedly hovering. Then my wingman's voice broke in, saying he had a visual on a bright white point he thought might be a star, but he said it was too big, too close, and it looked like it dropped altitude in a flash. Ground control repeated that we needed to approach with caution, and they'd keep a radar lock as best they could. That was the first time I personally heard, a tone of absolute confusion from the radar room. They kept losing lock every 2 or 3 seconds. We closed in, and that's when it happened. Off my left side, there was this craft, if you even want to call it that. It was shaped like a flattened sphere, or maybe an oval, with no visible wings, no external lights other than a dull, pulsating glow on the underside. It was almost the color of moonlight, if that makes sense, with a faint shimmer around it. I tried to radio in what I saw, but words failed me. I actually remember going quiet for a moment because my brain couldn't process the shape, and my wingman was just as silent. The flight controllers kept asking for a confirmation of contact, but I was just stuttering that we had a visual, but no idea what it was. And then it started moving. That's where every law of physics I ever relied on went right out the canopy. This thing drifted one direction, shot upward in a vertical climb so insane, I almost blacked out from trying to track it. Then it zipped horizontally at a speed that would have torn any conventional aircraft to pieces. I actually remember hearing a lesser-known story about some MiGs in the Soviet Union that encountered weird craft, but I never fully believed those stories until that moment. Something about seeing it with your own eyes changes everything. Ground control was in a frenzy. They told us to attempt an intercept, so we gunned our afterburners and climbed as steeply as we dared. My entire flight panel was screaming at me. Altitude warnings, speed limit warnings, the works. The UFO, and I'll just call it that because that's what it was, seemed to be playing with us, maintaining a ridiculous lead but never disappearing completely. Then it stopped again, dead in the air, but we still had forward momentum. We overshot the position in seconds. Think about that for a moment. We were pushing around Mach 1 at that altitude, and it just parked itself in midair. I remember I was so locked on chasing this thing, I nearly forgot an important detail: real-time life support. My oxygen flow was fine, but my mind was in that hyper-focus mode. It was like a dream state, where you're chasing something that never gets any closer. The next thing I knew, we got an order from the tower: break off pursuit. They wouldn't say over the radio exactly why. I thought maybe it was out of caution, or maybe they got a phone call from someone higher up. We'd never been told to abandon an intercept so abruptly before. Usually, we follow unidentified craft until we identify or force a landing, or escort them away from restricted airspace. This was different. They told us to return to base at once. When we got back, there was an entire group of men I didn't recognize waiting on the tarmac. They wore standard Air Force uniforms, but with insignias I'd never personally seen. They were calm, quiet, escorted us to a small briefing room, and basically separated me and my wingman so we couldn't compare notes. They asked me over and over what I saw, what maneuvers were performed, if I had any prior knowledge of experimental aircraft in the area. Next thing I knew, the conversation turned hush-hush, a lot of "don't discuss this with anyone." They confiscated my flight recordings. Then they let us go like nothing happened, only reminding us that we were bound by our security clearances to keep quiet. One thing that stuck in my mind was how they seemed more anxious about the fact we saw it than about the craft itself. It was like they were used to it, or they had at least some notion that these things existed. I never said a word outside my immediate circle, mostly out of fear that I'd get my entire career torpedoed. One time, a higher-up quietly told me off the record that I should never mention the incident near the canyon again, adding something like, "You don't know who's listening." That's about as close as I ever got to an official explanation. I spiraled a bit after that. My performances in the following weeks were fine in the air, But my mind was constantly replaying that moment when the UFO shot vertical, then darted away, then hovered. I wondered if I'd hallucinated or if there was some new state-of-the-art technology we were testing. But the idea that it was ours never sat right, because everything we had at the time, and even now, could not do what that thing did. We're talking instant acceleration, 90-degree turns at supersonic speeds, 0 sonic booms. None of that made sense. I tried to bury it, move on. I got a nice posting overseas a few years later, ended up retiring earlier than expected to spend time with family. I told my wife half-truths, mostly that I saw something extraordinary I couldn't explain. She was supportive, but I could see it worried her. She once asked if I thought it was some advanced foreign tech, but I just shook my head. It moved like it dismissed gravity entirely. Maybe somebody in another black project somewhere has broken the rules of aerodynamics, but if that's the case, they're eons ahead of anything we had back in '86. I realize now my startling recollection answers no one's questions. If anything, the more I think about that mission, the more I realize I'm not sure where we stand in the grand scheme of things up there. That encounter felt so far beyond our capabilities, it was practically magic. And the immediate clampdown by unknown officers was just as unsettling as the aerial ballet above the desert. On April 14th of this year, a couple named Sarah and Daniel decided to head out for a hike in the Smoky Mountains. It was a Saturday, and the two of them had the day free, so they figured they'd spend the afternoon outdoors. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a quick drive up, a couple of hours on the trail, and then back home before evening. They got to the trailhead around noon, parked the car, and set off. The weather was about as good as you could ask for, mid-60s, sunny, just a little breeze moving through the trees. A typical spring day. At the start of the hike, they passed a few people on their way out, families with kids, a couple of other hikers. But after that, the traffic on the trail really thinned out. They didn't see many people after the first mile or so, and before long it felt like they had the woods mostly to themselves. For the most part, the hike was normal. They walked, they talked, they stopped here and there to take a drink of water. They weren't pushing hard or trying to cover a lot of ground. This wasn't about distance. It was just about being outside. The only unusual thing that stood out to them was a smell. Every once in a while, they'd catch a strong, skunk-like odor. At first, Daniel didn't even say anything, but after it came back a second or third time, Sarah noticed it too. Their first thought was exactly what most of us would think, that a skunk had sprayed somewhere nearby. It wasn't constant, just here and there, strong for a few seconds, and then gone again. Neither of them gave it much weight. They laughed it off, said it probably was a skunk, and kept moving. It wasn't enough to make them turn back, and it didn't ruin the hike. Just one of those odd little things you run into in the woods. After about an hour and a half, they reached a spot on the trail where they figured it was a good point to turn around. They'd gone far enough, and they wanted to make it back before it got dark. Before heading back, Sarah asked Daniel to take a picture. She stood in front of a big oak tree, smiled, and he snapped the photo. Just one of the many pictures that they took that day. The rest of the hike back was just as uneventful. They retraced their steps, still catching that odd odor here and there, but otherwise nothing unusual. By late afternoon, they were back at the car, ready to head home. Later that evening, Sarah and Daniel were sitting at home, going through the pictures they'd taken on the hike. Like most people do, they weren't expecting anything more than a few shots of trees, trail markers, maybe one or two worth keeping. Sarah stopped when she reached the picture Daniel had taken of her in front of the oak tree. At first, she thought it looked fine, a typical hiking photo, but something on the side caught her attention. She zoomed in, and that's when she called Daniel over. On the left side of the frame, back in the trees, was what looked like a figure, tall, upright, wide through the shoulders. The longer they looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a trick of the light. It was something solid. They sat there scrolling in and out, checking it over and over again. Sarah swore she hadn't seen anything when the picture was taken. Daniel said the same thing. He was standing right there, facing that direction, and nothing had stood out to him at all. That's when the uneasiness started to creep in, because if they hadn't noticed it in person, then what exactly had the camera captured? They kept asking themselves the same questions. Could it have been another hiker? Maybe someone standing still in the background. But then they thought back to the trail. They hadn't seen many people at all, and at that point in the hike, it had been quiet for a long time. If someone had been close enough to end up in that picture, they felt like they would have noticed. And there was another detail that kept gnawing at them. That smell. The one they kept running into along the trail. At the time, they thought it was just a skunk. But now, sitting there looking at the picture, they couldn't help but connect the two. Sarah said the odor had been so strong in certain spots that it was like walking through a wall of it. Then just as quickly, it would disappear. Now she was asking herself, what if that smell wasn't a skunk at all? What if it was coming from whatever that figure was in the background? Sarah said that when she first realized it was a figure, her stomach dropped. Not because she thought she was in immediate danger, but because the thought hit her. Whatever it was, it had been there the entire time, watching them, and they never knew it. Daniel put it another way. He said, if we hadn't taken that picture, we'd never even know something was out there with us. We would have just chalked the whole hike up as normal. The smell too. None of it would have mattered. But now I can't stop thinking about what we didn't see.